r/MaliciousCompliance MIL called me out at party, so I exposed her surrogate lies. The champagne flute slipped from my fingers as my mother-in-law's voice cut through the elegant dinner party chatter like a rusty knife. Well, since Sarah here is obviously too selfish and career-obsessed to give my son the family he deserves, I've taken matters into my own hands. 34 pairs of eyes swiveled toward me as I stood frozen next to the marble kitchen island, champagne pooling at my feet. Patricia Whitmore, because of course she hyphenated to keep her family name prominent, smiled that razor-sharp smile I'd come to dread over the past 18 months of marriage to her son David. I've hired a surrogate, she announced, raising her own glass toward the crowd of relatives, family friends, and David's colleagues. Someone who actually understands the importance of continuing the Whitmore legacy. My husband's face drained of color from across the room. His cousin Jessica gasped audibly. Great Aunt Helen clutched her pearls, literally clutched them. Patricia, David started, but his mother steamrolled right over him. The paperwork is already in motion. I've selected a lovely girl, young, healthy, excellent breeding potential. Unlike some people who apparently think their little marketing job is more important than basic biological responsibilities. The room was dead silent except for the soft jazz playing from hidden speakers. I felt heat creeping up my neck, the familiar sting of tears threatening behind my eyes. For 8 months, I'd endured Patricia's passive-aggressive comments about my choices. Her pointed questions about when we'd get serious about children. Her helpful suggestions about fertility specialists while somehow making it sound like I was deliberately withholding grandchildren out of spite. What she didn't know, what only David and I knew, was that we'd been trying for over a year. That I'd been tracking ovulation cycles, taking vitamins, doing yoga poses with my legs up the wall like some desperate pretzel. That we'd already spent thousands on fertility testing only to join the wonderful world of unexplained infertility, where doctors shrug and tell you to keep trying while your body betrays you month after month. But Patricia didn't know any of this because it was private. Personal. Not ammunition for her social manipulation games. The baby will be here by next Christmas, she continued, absolutely glowing with self-satisfaction. Finally, a grandchild worthy of the family name. And Sarah, dear, you should really thank me for solving your little problem. She gestured toward me with her manicured hand, that condescending smile never wavering. Well, where are your manners? The room held its collective breath. Someone's phone was definitely recording, probably cousin Mark, who treated family drama like content for his social media. David looked like he wanted to disappear into the imported Italian tile. This was my moment. I could smile, nod, excuse myself to the bathroom to cry, and let Patricia's narrative stand. Let everyone believe I was indeed the selfish career woman who'd forced her poor mother-in-law to hire a stranger to carry her son's child. Or I could tell them the truth about Patricia's surrogate arrangement, the truth I discovered 3 weeks ago when I'd accidentally overheard her phone conversation. The truth about what she was really up to with this elaborate fiction. I stepped over the broken glass, squared my shoulders, and smiled back at her. You know what, Patricia? You're absolutely right. I should thank you. The predatory gleam in Patricia's eyes intensified as she sensed what she thought was my surrender. She practically preened, turning toward her audience with the satisfaction of a cat who'd finally cornered a particularly troublesome mouse. Well, it's about time you showed some gratitude, she said, her voice dripping with false magnanimity. I know this can't be easy for you, dear, but sometimes we need to accept help when we're limited. Limited. The word hit like a slap. Around the room, I could see the family dynamics shifting in real time. David's father Robert looked uncomfortable but said nothing, as usual. Sister-in-law Amanda was practically vibrating with second-hand embarrassment. The older generation nodded approvingly, because Patricia had always been the family's golden child, the one who could do no wrong. You're so generous, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Tell me, how did you find this surrogate? I'm curious about the process. Patricia's smile faltered for just a microsecond, so brief that anyone who didn't know her well would have missed it. But I'd been studying her manipulations for months. I knew her tells. Oh, well, these things are complicated, she waved dismissively. Agencies, contracts, medical screenings. Very expensive, but worth it for family. Absolutely, I agreed, stepping closer. The crowd unconsciously leaned in, sensing something shifting in the dynamic. And the timeline, you said Christmas? That's what, 8 months away? She must already be pregnant then. Yes, of course she is, Patricia said quickly. Too quickly. About 6 weeks along. Everything's progressing beautifully. David's head snapped up. Even through his mortification, I could see the confusion in his eyes. We'd never discussed surrogacy with his mother. We'd barely discussed it with each other, beyond some tentative conversations about maybe exploring it in the future if other options didn't work out. 6 weeks, I repeated thoughtfully. How exciting. And David provided the genetic material when exactly? The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Patricia's champagne glass trembled slightly in her hand. These are private medical matters, Sarah. Hardly appropriate dinner party conversation. Oh, but you're the one who brought it up, I said sweetly. In front of 34 witnesses, actually. I'm just trying to understand the timeline, since my husband never mentioned participating in any of this. David found his voice. Mom, what is she talking about? We never agreed to. David, please, Patricia interrupted, her commanding tone the one she'd perfected during his childhood. You know how overwhelmed you've been with work. I handled the details. What details? His voice was getting louder. You can't just hire someone to carry my child without my knowledge. That's not how any of this works. The crowd was riveted now. Phones were definitely out. Great Aunt Helen looked scandalized, but in an entertained way. This was better than her soap operas. Patricia's carefully constructed moment was crumbling, and I could see her scrambling to regain control. The important thing, she said, speaking over David's protests, is that the family line will continue. Sarah clearly isn't capable of providing what this family needs, so I took initiative. What family needs, I repeated softly, or what you need, Patricia. Her eyes narrowed dangerously. We were approaching the point of no return, and we both knew it. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent room. I'm about to tell everyone exactly what you've really been up to. The silent stretch taut as Patricia's mask finally began to slip completely. Her face went pale beneath her expertly applied foundation, but she straightened her spine and lifted her chin, preparing for battle. Sarah, you're being hysterical, she said, her voice carrying that dismissive tone that had made me feel small for months. I understand this is difficult for you to accept, but there is no surrogate. The words dropped into the room like stones into still water. I watched the ripples of shock spread across faces, confusion, disbelief, a few knowing looks from family members who'd apparently suspected Patricia's dramatics before. Of course there is, Patricia snapped, but her voice had gone shrill. Don't be ridiculous. Really? What's her name? That's confidential medical. What agency did you use? I don't have to justify. How much did you pay? Sarah, stop this. David's voice cut through our rapid-fire exchange, but I couldn't tell if he was trying to protect me or his mother. Maybe both. I turned to address the room, my voice calm and clear. 3 weeks ago, I came by the house to drop off the Christmas decorations Patricia had asked to borrow. She was on the phone in the garden room, and the French doors were open. She was talking to her friend Margaret about the brilliant plan to force David and me into having children by pretending she'd hired a surrogate. Patricia's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the marble floor. The crystal explosion seemed to break whatever spell had kept the room frozen. That's completely untrue, she stammered, but her face was now bright red. You're lying. She said, and I quote, once they think the surrogate is already pregnant, they'll panic and get serious about having their own baby. Sarah's biological clock will kick in when faced with competition. I looked directly at Patricia. Should I continue? David's face cycled through confusion, realization, and then pure fury. Mom, please tell me this isn't true. But Robert, Patricia's usually silent husband, was staring at his wife with growing recognition. Patricia, he said slowly, is this like the time you told the country club we were donating a new tennis pavilion? That's completely different. Or when you announced at Jennifer's wedding that we were buying them a house? Robert's voice was getting stronger, like a man waking up from a long sleep. How many people have you told about the surrogate? Patricia's eyes darted around the room, looking for an ally, an escape route, anything. I was trying to help my son. You were trying to control us, David said, his voice deadly quiet. And you humiliated my wife in front of our entire family to do it. Sister-in-law Amanda stepped forward, her face pale. Patricia, I already told my book club about the baby. And my mother. She started knitting blankets. The full scope of Patricia's web of lies was becoming clear. Cousin Jessica raised her hand tentatively. I may have mentioned it at work. People are already asking about baby shower dates. Oh God, Great Aunt Helen whispered. I put it in the church newsletter. The room erupted in horrified whispers as family members began calculating how far the lie had spread, who they'd told, what promises had been made based on Patricia's fabrication. Patricia stood in the center of it all, her perfect dinner party dissolving into chaos, her carefully maintained image cracking like ice in spring. You don't understand, she said desperately, but her voice was lost in the growing storm of voices. And I realized I'd only just begun to expose the depth of her deception. The chaos in the room was intoxicating, but I wasn't done. Not even close. Patricia had spent months making me feel like a failure, and I discovered her lies ran deeper than just this surrogate fantasy. Actually, I said, raising my voice above the growing murmur of shocked relatives, there's more. Patricia's head whipped toward me, her eyes wide with genuine fear now. Sarah, please. The fertility clinic bills, I continued, pulling out my phone. The ones you've been intercepting from our mailbox and paying yourself. David's face went white. What? Your mother has been paying our fertility clinic bills for 3 months. Not out of generosity, to control the information flow. She's been calling the clinic, pretending to be me, getting updates on our treatment progress. The room went dead silent again. Even the soft jazz seemed to fade into nothing. That's a federal crime, whispered Amanda, who worked in healthcare administration. HIPAA violations, mail theft. Patricia was shaking her head frantically. I was trying to help. You were trying to sabotage us, I said, my voice getting stronger with each word. You wanted us to fail naturally so you could swoop in as the savior. The surrogate story was plan B, when paying our bills and monitoring our medical information wasn't enough control for you. Robert was staring at his wife like he'd never seen her before. Patricia, tell me you didn't actually intercept their mail. That's a felony. The mailman knows me, she said weakly. I just said I was helping. You committed mail fraud, David said, his voice hollow. You've been violating my wife's medical privacy. Mom, what the hell is wrong with you? But I still wasn't finished. The nuclear option was sitting in my phone, and after months of humiliation, I was ready to use it. And then there's the real reason you're so desperate for grandchildren, I said, scrolling through my photos. The trust fund. Patricia went absolutely rigid. Sarah, don't. What trust fund? Robert demanded. I looked at David's confused face, then at Robert's, realizing neither of them knew. Patricia had been playing a much longer game than anyone understood. Your mother's family trust, the one that's been funding your lifestyle for 20 years, requires her children to produce heirs by age 30. David turns 30 in 4 months. The color drained from Robert's face. The Whitmore Trust? Patricia, you told me that money was from your consulting business. If David doesn't have a child by his 30th birthday, Patricia loses access to the trust fund. All of it. The house, the cars, the country club membership, this whole lifestyle, gone. David was staring at his mother with growing horror. You've been pressuring us to have kids because of money? It's not just money, Patricia said desperately, it's family legacy, it's $2.3 million, I said, reading from the trust documents I'd photographed. Plus the annual disbursements you've been living on. The room exploded into chaos. Robert was demanding explanations about their finances. Great Aunt Helen was clutching her chest dramatically. Multiple conversations broke out at once as family members processed the revelation that Patricia's comfortable lifestyle was built on lies and a ticking biological clock. But Patricia wasn't defeated yet. She straightened up, her face hardening into something ugly and desperate. Fine, she snarled, dropping all pretense of maternal concern. You want to play dirty? Let's talk about what really happened at your precious fertility clinic. My blood turned to ice. There was only one thing she could be referring to, something David didn't even know about yet. Patricia, don't, I whispered. But she smiled that razor-sharp smile again, sensing blood in the water. Oh, I think everyone should know about Sarah's little secret. The blood drained from my face as Patricia's smile turned predatory. She had one card left to play, and we both knew it would be devastating. What secret? David asked, his voice tight with exhaustion and growing dread. Patricia's eyes never left mine as she spoke. Why don't you tell them about the miscarriage, Sarah? The one you hid from my son for 2 months? The room went completely silent. I felt like I was falling through space, my carefully constructed moment of triumph crumbling around me. David's face cycled through confusion, hurt, and something that looked dangerously close to betrayal. Sarah? His voice was barely a whisper. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. How could I explain the miscarriage at 6 weeks that had happened right before Christmas? How could I tell him that I'd wanted to wait until after the holidays to share the devastating news, not wanting to ruin his favorite time of year? How could I make him understand that every day I delayed telling him had made it harder, until the secret felt too big and terrible to voice? She lost it in December, Patricia continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy. But she's been letting everyone, including you, David, believe they were still trying naturally. She's been lying to you for months. That's not, I started, but David held up his hand. Is it true? He asked, his voice hollow. Yes, but... Jesus Christ, Sarah. He ran his hands through his hair, looking like he might be sick. A miscarriage? And you didn't tell me? The family was watching our marriage implode in real time. I could see phones recording, faces twisted with uncomfortable fascination. This was beyond gossip now, this was trauma porn. I wanted to tell you, I said desperately, but it was Christmas, and your presentation for the Morrison account was... My presentation? David's voice cracked. You thought my work presentation was more important than our baby? It wasn't like that. What was it like, then? He was getting louder, months of stress and confusion finally boiling over. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been lying to me about the most important thing in our lives while I've been watching my mother torture you about getting pregnant. Patricia looked absolutely triumphant, even as her own lies lay in ruins around her. She'd managed to turn the narrative back on me, to make me the villain in front of everyone who mattered to David. I was protecting you, I said, my voice breaking. I was protecting us. I didn't want. You were protecting yourself, David shot back. Just like you're protecting yourself now by destroying my mother instead of dealing with your own issues. The unfairness of it hit me like a physical blow. Your mother has been committing federal crimes and lying to everyone about fake pregnancies, but I'm the problem? You lied about our baby dying, he said, and the word dying hung in the air like a physical presence. Robert, who had been silent during our exchange, suddenly stepped forward. Wait just a minute, he said, his voice carrying an authority I'd never heard from him before. Patricia, how exactly do you know about Sarah's medical information? Patricia's triumph flickered. In her eagerness to wound me, she'd revealed the depth of her surveillance. The clinic called to confirm. They called to confirm a miscarriage that happened months ago? Robert's voice was getting dangerously quiet. Why would they call you about that? The room was watching a different kind of implosion now. Amanda stepped forward, her face pale with professional horror. Patricia, did you call the clinic pretending to be Sarah to get information about a miscarriage? The silence stretched out like a wire about to snap. Answer the question, Mom, David said, his anger now redirecting toward his mother. How did you know about something my wife never told anyone? Patricia's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, finally realizing she'd trapped herself in her own web of manipulation. And I realized this was far from over. The realization hit everyone in the room simultaneously. Patricia had been monitoring my private medical information without my consent, including the most devastating moment of my life. But before I could process the full implications, my phone buzzed with a text that made my blood run cold. Unknown number, I murmured, then read aloud without thinking. Stop lying about the surrogate or I'll tell everyone what really happened at the clinic. David's head snapped toward me. What the hell does that mean? Patricia's face went ashen, but she wasn't looking at me, she was staring at someone in the crowd. I followed her gaze to see Margaret Caldwell, Patricia's longtime friend, slowly backing toward the door with her phone in her hand. Margaret? Robert called out, his voice sharp. Do you have something to add to this conversation? The older woman froze like a deer in headlights. Patricia asked me to help with a small project. What kind of project? David demanded. Margaret's eyes darted between Patricia and the exit. She wanted me to call the clinic and pretend to be Sarah. Just once. To confirm appointment times so she could coordinate supportive care. The room erupted again, but I was focused on something else, the way Patricia was frantically texting someone. Her face had gone from triumphant to panicked in seconds. Who are you texting? I asked sharply. No one, she said quickly, shoving her phone into her purse. But Amanda had moved closer and caught a glimpse of the screen. She's texting someone named Dr. Martinez. The message says emergency, need to discuss patient confidentiality issues immediately. My stomach dropped. Dr. Martinez was our fertility specialist. Patricia, I said slowly, pieces clicking into place, what did you do? I don't know what you mean. You didn't just intercept our bills and call for information, I continued, my voice getting stronger as the horrible truth crystallized. You actually contacted our doctor directly, didn't you? David was staring at his mother with growing horror. Mom, please tell me you didn't interfere with Sarah's actual medical treatment. I was trying to help. Answer the question. Robert's voice boomed across the room, startling everyone. I'd never heard him raise his voice to Patricia before. Did you contact their doctor? Patricia's resolve finally cracked completely. I may have expressed concerns about Sarah's commitment to the process. Dr. Martinez is a family friend, and I thought. You sabotaged my medical care? I whispered, the full scope of her manipulation becoming clear. The medication changes, the appointment delays, the test results that took weeks to come back, that was you? I was ensuring you received the best possible treatment. You were ensuring I would fail, I said, my voice rising. You wanted our fertility treatments to drag out so you could play savior with your fake surrogate story. David's face cycled through disbelief, rage, and something approaching disgust. You interfered with medical treatment that we were paying for, that you were secretly paying for, to manipulate the outcome? But Margaret was still backing toward the door, and something about her panicked expression made me suspicious. Margaret, I called out, what else did Patricia ask you to do? The woman froze again, her face crumpling with guilt. The fake positive pregnancy test. Last month. She asked me to plant it in your bathroom medicine cabinet during the dinner party, then call and ask how you were feeling, to make you think. The revelation hit like a bomb. You made me think I was pregnant? For 3 days I thought, do you have any idea what that did to me emotionally? Patricia was completely exposed now, her months of psychological warfare laid bare in front of the entire family. But as I looked around the room at the shocked, disgusted faces, I realized we'd crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. And David was staring at both his mother and me like he didn't recognize either of us anymore. The room felt like it was spinning around me. 3 days. For 3 days last month, I had felt that flutter of hope, that maybe this time feeling that every woman struggling with infertility knows by heart. I'd been afraid to tell David, afraid to jinx it, planning the perfect way to surprise him with the news. And it had all been a lie. A cruel, calculated manipulation orchestrated by his own mother. You planted a fake pregnancy test, I repeated, my voice hollow. You made me believe I was pregnant, knowing I would have to face another devastating disappointment when my period started. Margaret was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. Patricia said it would motivate you to try harder. She said you were being lazy about the whole process. Lazy? The word came out as a shriek. I've been getting hormone injections twice a day for months. I've had my blood drawn so many times I look like a drug addict. I've been tracking every symptom, every cycle, every possible sign of hope, and you two were playing games with my body? David had gone completely white. Mom, you didn't just interfere with our treatment. You tortured my wife. 4 months. But Patricia wasn't done. Even cornered, even exposed, she had one more weapon to deploy. Don't you dare lecture me about torture, she spat, her composure finally completely shattered. You want to know about torture? Watching my son married to a woman who's so desperate to play victim that she's probably lying about the miscarriage too. The room went dead silent. What did you just say? David's voice was dangerously quiet. Think about it, Patricia continued, her voice getting shriller. She claims she had a miscarriage she never told you about, but she has no proof. No hospital records she's shown you. No doctor's notes. Just her word that she was protecting you from bad news. My hands started shaking. You think I would lie about losing a baby? I think you're a manipulative little girl who can't handle the fact that some women are simply not meant to be mothers, Patricia snarled. And I think you've been using fertility issues as an excuse to avoid admitting you're too selfish and immature for children. The cruelty of it took my breath away. But what made it worse was the flicker of uncertainty I saw cross David's face. After everything, after learning about his mother's crimes, her lies, her systematic psychological warfare, he was actually considering whether I might have invented a miscarriage for sympathy. David, I whispered, you can't possibly believe that. He looked at me, his face a mask of exhaustion and confusion. I don't know what to believe anymore, Sarah. My mother's been lying, you've been lying, everyone's been lying about everything. I never lied about losing our baby, I said, tears starting to fall. I would never lie about that. But you did lie, he said quietly. You lied for 2 months. Every day, you looked at me and chose not to tell me we'd lost a child. How is that different from any of the other lies being told in this room? Robert stepped forward, his face grim. Because one is grief, David, and the other is sociopathy. Your mother committed federal crimes to control your wife's reproductive choices. Stay out of this, Robert, Patricia snapped. You've never understood what it takes to maintain this family's status. Status? Great Aunt Helen's voice cut across the room like a whip. Child, you brought nothing but shame on this family name. Lying about grandchildren, interfering with medical treatment, stealing mail, what's next? Are you going to kidnap a baby from the hospital? The suggestion hung in the air, and I saw something flicker across Patricia's face. Something guilty and desperate that made my blood freeze. Patricia, I said slowly, what were you really planning to do when your fake surrogate story fell apart? Her silence was answer enough. And suddenly I realized we'd only uncovered the beginning of her deception. The guilty look that flashed across Patricia's face sent ice through my veins. In the chaos of exposed lies and federal crimes, I'd missed something crucial. Something that made her confident enough to orchestrate this entire elaborate deception. Patricia, I said slowly, my voice cutting through the family argument still raging around us, you said the surrogate was 6 weeks pregnant. You had specific details about timeline, about Christmas delivery. She pressed her lips together, but I could see the panic building behind her eyes. You've been planning this for months, I continued, pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. The fake pregnancy test, the medical interference, the intercepted bills, you needed our fertility treatments to fail publicly. You needed everyone to see me as the problem. David stopped mid-argument with his father to stare at me. What are you getting at? She needed a reason to bring in an outside solution, I said, my voice getting stronger as the full scope of her plan crystallized. But there never was going to be a surrogate, was there, Patricia? Margaret, who'd been quietly sobbing by the door, suddenly went rigid. Patricia, you said we were just buying time until... Margaret, shut up, Patricia hissed, but it was too late. Until what? Robert demanded, moving toward his wife with an expression I'd never seen before. Patricia, what was the endgame here? The room had gone completely quiet again, but this silence felt different. Dangerous. Like we were all standing on the edge of a cliff none of us had seen coming. You were going to steal a baby, I whispered, the horrible truth settling over me like ice water. That's why you were so specific about Christmas, about the timeline. You were buying yourself 9 months to figure out how to actually produce an infant. Patricia's face cycled through denial, rage, and finally a kind of cold calculation that was more terrifying than her earlier hysteria. Don't be ridiculous, she said, but her voice had gone flat. Emotionless. You're being dramatic. Am I? I pulled out my phone and started scrolling. Because 3 weeks ago, when I overheard your conversation with Margaret, you weren't just talking about fake pregnancies. You mentioned researching private adoption agencies. Cash transactions. Babies from desperate situations. Amanda gasped audibly. That's human trafficking. It's family preservation, Patricia said, her mask finally slipping completely. Do you have any idea what's at stake here? The trust fund, the family reputation, the legacy. You were going to buy a baby, David said, his voice hollow with disbelief. You were literally planning to purchase a child and present it as our biological son or daughter. I was going to save this family, Patricia snapped, her composure completely gone now. While you two were playing house and pretending that fertility treatments might actually work, I was taking action. Real action. Robert had gone completely white. Patricia, please tell me you didn't actually contact any agencies. Please tell me you didn't put money down on. He couldn't finish the sentence, but Patricia's silence was answer enough. Oh God, Margaret whispered from the doorway. The $20,000. Patricia, you said that was a deposit on medical procedures. What $20,000? David's voice cracked. Patricia straightened her spine, her face hardening into something I'd never seen before, something cold and calculating and completely without remorse. The amount required to secure a healthy newborn from a private agency, she said calmly. White, college-educated birth mother, clean medical history. Due in December. The room exploded into chaos, but all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears as I realized Patricia hadn't been planning an elaborate lie. She'd been planning an elaborate crime. And somewhere out there was a pregnant woman who had no idea her baby was already promised to a family that didn't even know she existed. The weight of Patricia's confession settled over the room like toxic smoke. $20,000. A real pregnant woman. A baby that was supposed to be delivered to us without our knowledge or consent. Patricia, Robert's voice was barely controlled, where is this woman? What agency? But Patricia had gone completely rigid, her face a mask of cold defiance. I'm not saying another word without a lawyer. The shift in her demeanor was terrifying, from desperate mother-in-law to calculating criminal in the span of a heartbeat. This wasn't hysteria anymore. This was someone who'd been planning felonies for months and just realized she might actually face consequences. You don't get to lawyer up in the middle of our living room, David said, his voice shaking with rage. You just admitted to human trafficking. Where is the pregnant woman? David's right, Amanda said, pulling out her phone. I'm calling the police. This has gone way beyond family drama. Put the phone down, Patricia snapped, but her authority was gone. She looked around the room desperately, finally realizing that 34 witnesses had just heard her confess to multiple felonies. Margaret was hyperventilating by the door. She told me it was legal, she gasped. Private adoption, she said. The woman wanted to give up the baby anyway. What woman? I demanded, moving toward her. Margaret, there's a real person out there who thinks she's placing her baby with a loving family, and instead it's going to, what? Patricia was going to pretend it was from her fake surrogate? The girl is 19, Margaret whispered, tears streaming down her face. College student. Patricia said she was overwhelmed, wanted the baby to go to a good family. Where is she? Robert's voice boomed across the room. But Patricia was already moving, grabbing her purse and heading for the back door. I don't have to listen to this. You're all overreacting to a private family matter. David stepped into her path, blocking her escape. You're not leaving. Not until we know where this girl is and what you promised her. Get out of my way, David. No. His voice was steel. You've manipulated our marriage, interfered with medical treatment, committed mail fraud, and apparently put a down payment on a human being. You're not going anywhere. Patricia's face twisted into something ugly and desperate. That girl was going to abort anyway. I saved a life. I gave that baby a chance at a real family instead of some teenage mother who can't even afford prenatal vitamins. The casual cruelty of it, reducing a pregnant teenager to an obstacle between Patricia and her trust fund, made my stomach turn. You don't know anything about her situation, I said, my voice shaking with fury. You found a vulnerable young woman and exploited her desperation to solve your money problems. Money problems? Patricia laughed, but it sounded hysterical. This isn't about money, you naive little girl. This is about legacy. About ensuring the Whitmore name continues with appropriate bloodlines. Appropriate bloodlines? Great Aunt Helen's voice cut like a blade. Child, you sound like something out of Nazi Germany. That poor girl deserves better than your schemes. Amanda had her phone pressed to her ear, speaking rapidly to what sounded like a 911 dispatcher. Patricia's eyes went wide with genuine fear as she realized this was really happening. Fine, she said, her voice turning vicious. Call the police. But that baby is going to be born whether you like it or not. And that girl signed a contract. The casual way she said it, like a 19-year-old signature could somehow legitimize human trafficking, made me realize we were dealing with someone who'd completely lost touch with reality. And somewhere out there was a pregnant teenager who had no idea she'd become a pawn in Patricia's twisted game. The sound of sirens in the distance made Patricia's face go completely white. Amanda was still on the phone with the dispatcher, providing our address and explaining that we had someone who'd confessed to human trafficking in our living room. You called the police on your own family, Patricia said, her voice filled with disbelief and venom. Over a private business arrangement. Business arrangement? David's voice cracked. Mom, you put a down payment on a baby like it was a used car. But Patricia was looking around the room with a calculating expression of someone planning an escape route. Her eyes landed on cousin Mark, who was still filming everything on his phone. Mark, delete that video right now, she commanded. Are you insane? Mark replied, backing away from her. This is evidence of a crime. Evidence of what? A grandmother trying to help her son start a family? Patricia's voice was getting shriller, more desperate. I haven't done anything wrong. That girl was going to give up the baby anyway. To legitimate adoptive parents through proper channels, Robert interrupted, his face gray with horror. Not to be sold to you so you could pretend it came from a fake surrogate. Margaret was still sobbing by the door, but between gasps she managed to choke out more details. The agency, it's not really an agency. It's just a woman named Carol who finds pregnant girls in bad situations. She said it was completely legal, just private. My blood turned to ice. Margaret, that's not an adoption agency. That's a baby broker. What's a baby broker? Great Aunt Helen asked, though her expression suggested she could guess. Someone who essentially sells babies, Amanda explained, covering her phone. They find desperate pregnant women and match them with buyers willing to pay cash. It's completely illegal. Patricia was shaking her head frantically. You're all making this sound so sordid. I'm providing a loving home for a child who would otherwise be. Otherwise be what? I demanded. Raised by his actual mother? Placed through legitimate adoption services? Patricia, you don't even know this girl's situation. For all you know, she's planning to keep the baby and just needed financial help with medical bills. The look that crossed Patricia's face told me I'd hit close to the mark. Oh my God, David whispered, staring at his mother. That's exactly what happened, isn't it? You found a pregnant teenager who needed help with medical bills, and you convinced her to give you the baby instead. I offered her a better life for her child, Patricia said defensively, but her voice was losing strength. $20,000 is more than she'd make in a year at whatever minimum wage job. You exploited a teenager's financial desperation, Robert said, his voice hollow with disgust. Patricia, how did we get here? How did you become someone who preys on children? The sirens were getting louder now, and I could see Patricia calculating whether she could make it to the back door before the police arrived. But David was still blocking her path, and the weight of 34 witnesses seemed to be finally sinking in. The girl's name, I said firmly. We need her name and contact information. Right now. I'm not telling you anything, Patricia snapped, but her defiance felt hollow. She was trapped and she knew it. Margaret raised her head, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Her name is Emma, she whispered. Emma Rodriguez. She's a sophomore at the community college. Patricia whirled on her friend with fury. Margaret, shut up. But it was too late. The sirens had stopped outside, and through the front windows, I could see police cars pulling into the driveway. And I realized our family dinner party was about to become a crime scene. The police entered through the front door just as Patricia made her desperate break for the back exit. She didn't make it 3 steps before David grabbed her arm, and the sound of her purse hitting the marble floor echoed through the suddenly silent room. Ma'am, we need you to stay right where you are, the lead officer said, his hand resting casually on his radio. 2 more officers flanked him, their eyes scanning the room full of well-dressed family members holding champagne glasses like weapons. Patricia straightened her spine, and I watched her transform one final time, from cornered criminal back to society matron. Officer, I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. My daughter-in-law is having some sort of emotional breakdown. The audacity of it took my breath away. Even with 34 witnesses to her confession, she was going to try to spin this as my mental health crisis. We received a report of human trafficking, the officer said calmly, pulling out a notebook. Someone want to tell me what's going on here? Before I could speak, Great Aunt Helen stepped forward with her walker, moving faster than I'd ever seen her move. Officer, that woman, she pointed directly at Patricia, just confessed to purchasing a baby from a pregnant teenager. She's been planning this for months. That's completely false, Patricia said smoothly. I've been trying to help my son and his wife with their fertility struggles through legitimate surrogacy arrangements. Sarah has been under tremendous emotional stress. Bullshit, David interrupted, his voice cutting across his mother's performance. Officer, my mother just admitted to paying $20,000 to someone named Carol who connects desperate pregnant women with people willing to pay cash for babies. The officer's expression sharpened. Ma'am, is that true? Patricia's mask flickered for just a moment. I may have explored private adoption options. She specifically said she put down money on a baby from a 19-year-old college student named Emma Rodriguez, Amanda interrupted, still holding her phone. I recorded part of the conversation. The officer turned to Amanda with interest. You have a recording? But Patricia wasn't finished. Officer, you need to understand the context here. My daughter-in-law has been lying to the family about fertility treatments, creating drama and discord. She's even lied about having a miscarriage. Enough. Robert's voice boomed across the room with an authority that surprised everyone, including Patricia. Officer, my wife has been intercepting our son's mail, impersonating his wife to medical professionals, and by her own admission, has paid money to acquire an infant through illegal channels. I want her arrested. The transformation on Patricia's face was terrifying. The society matron mask cracked completely, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. You want to arrest me, Robert? Fine. But that baby is still coming in December, and there's nothing any of you can do about it. Emma signed papers. What kind of papers? The officer asked sharply. Margaret, who'd been silent since the police arrived, suddenly spoke up through her tears. Private adoption papers. But they weren't notarized or anything official. Carol said the legal stuff would come later. Because they're fake, I said, the pieces clicking together. Patricia, those papers aren't worth anything. You've been scamming this girl just like you've been scamming us. The officer was writing rapidly in his notebook. Ma'am, I need you to provide all documentation related to this arrangement. Names, addresses, financial records. Patricia looked around the room desperately, finally seeming to realize that her 30-year marriage, her family relationships, and her freedom were all crumbling simultaneously. I want a lawyer, she said quietly. You can call one from the station, the officer replied, reaching for his handcuffs. And as I watched Patricia Whitmore get arrested in her own living room, I realized this was only the beginning of untangling the web she'd woven around all our lives. The click of handcuffs echoing through the marble foyer should have felt like victory, but as I watched Patricia being read her Miranda rights, all I felt was a hollow ache where our family used to be. We'll need statements from all of you, the lead officer said, surveying the room full of shocked relatives. This is going to take several hours. David hadn't moved from where he'd blocked his mother's escape route. He was staring at the spot where she'd been standing, his face blank with shock. When the officers led her past him toward the door, she stopped and looked directly at him. This isn't over, David, she said quietly, her voice carrying that familiar commanding tone even with her hands cuffed behind her back. That girl is still pregnant, and she still needs the money I promised her. What happens to her now? The manipulation was breathtaking. Even in handcuffs, she was trying to make us responsible for the consequences of her crimes. Mom, stop, David said, but his voice cracked on the words. Emma Rodriguez is 7 months pregnant, son. 7 months. She's been counting on that money for medical bills, for housing. If you destroy this arrangement out of spite, you're hurting an innocent child. My stomach dropped. 7 months. Not 6 weeks like she'd told everyone at the party. Wait, I called out as the officers paused. Officer, she told us earlier the girl was 6 weeks along. Now she's saying 7 months. Which is it? Patricia's face went rigid, realizing her mistake. The lead officer turned back to her with renewed interest. Ma'am, you've given conflicting information about the timeline. Which statement is accurate? The dates are complicated with private arrangements. There's no arrangement, Margaret suddenly spoke up, her voice stronger now. I've been helping with phone calls, and Emma doesn't know about any adoption. Patricia told her she was getting financial assistance for medical bills in exchange for agreeing to consider adoption after the birth. The girl thinks she still has options. The room went dead silent as the full scope of Patricia's deception became clear. She hadn't just exploited a desperate teenager, she'd been lying to her about the terms of their agreement. Jesus Christ, Mom, David whispered. You've been lying to everyone. The family, Emma, even your accomplice. But the officer was focused on something else. Ma'am, if this young woman is 7 months pregnant and believes she's receiving medical assistance rather than payment for adoption, we have a much more serious situation here. Robert stepped forward, his face gray. Officer, what kind of serious situation? Fraud, coercion, possibly kidnapping conspiracy if she was planning to take the baby under false pretenses, the officer replied grimly. We need to contact this Emma Rodriguez immediately. Patricia's mask finally slipped completely. She's a stupid girl who got herself pregnant and can't afford the consequences. I was helping her. You were exploiting her, I interrupted, fury building in my chest. A 19-year-old college student, probably terrified and desperate, and you saw an opportunity to solve your trust fund problem. The trust fund expires in 4 months, Patricia said desperately, looking around the room for any remaining allies. If David doesn't have a child by his 30th birthday, we lose everything. The house, the lifestyle, the social standing, everything this family has worked for. Everything you've worked for, Robert corrected, his voice hollow. I thought your consulting business was supporting us. I had no idea our entire life was funded by your family money. Great Aunt Helen tapped her walker against the floor sharply. Patricia, child, your great-grandfather would roll over in his grave if he knew you tried to buy a baby to secure an inheritance. But the officer was already on his radio, calling for a social worker and requesting an immediate welfare check on Emma Rodriguez. As I listened to him relay Patricia's confession, I realized we'd stumbled into something much bigger than family drama. Somewhere in this city was a 7 months pregnant teenager who thought she was getting help with medical bills. Instead, she'd become the target of an elaborate criminal conspiracy. And now we were all complicit in whatever happened next. The social worker arrived within 20 minutes, a tired-looking woman in her 50s who introduced herself as Linda Chin. She'd clearly been briefed on the situation because she went straight to Margaret, pulling out a recording device. Mrs. Caldwell, I need you to tell me everything you know about Emma Rodriguez's current living situation and what exactly Patricia Whitmore promised her. Margaret's mascara-streaked face crumpled further as she began recounting months of phone calls and lies. Patricia said Emma was living in her car sometimes, staying with different friends. The girl thought Patricia was from a charitable organization that helps pregnant students. My heart sank. A homeless teenager, probably scared and alone, trusting someone who claimed to be helping her. What organization? Linda asked sharply. Something called the Family Future Foundation, Margaret whispered. Patricia had business cards made and everything. The officer looked up from his notes. Ma'am, there's no registered charity by that name in the state. Of course there wasn't. Patricia had created an entire fake charity to lure a desperate pregnant girl into her scheme. The depth of the deception was staggering. David had been silent through most of the questioning, but suddenly he stepped forward. Where is she right now? Emma? Linda checked her phone. My colleagues are doing a welfare check at the address we found, but... She frowned at the screen. The apartment manager says no one by that name has ever lived there. A chill ran down my spine. Patricia, what address did you give the police? But Patricia had invoked her right to remain silent and was sitting stiffly in the patrol car, staring straight ahead. Margaret raised her trembling hand. I have her real address. Patricia told me not to mention it to anyone, said it was for Emma's privacy, but... She pulled out her phone with shaking fingers. She's been staying at the Sunrise Motel on Highway 9. Room 23. The motel I knew she was referring to was one of those pay-by-the-week places where people went when they'd run out of other options. The thought of a 7 months pregnant teenager living there alone made me physically sick. We need to go there now, Linda said, already heading for the door. If this girl thinks she's getting medical assistance and finds out the arrangement is actually illegal adoption fraud, she could panic. At 7 months pregnant, that could be dangerous for both her and the baby. David grabbed his keys. I'm coming with you. Sir, that's not. That's my mother's victim, he said firmly. I need to see what she's done. I need to help fix this. But as we prepared to leave for the motel, Amanda's phone rang. She answered it with a frown, then her face went completely white. That was my friend Jessica who works in the emergency department at General Hospital, she said slowly. A pregnant teenager named Emma Rodriguez was just brought in by ambulance 20 minutes ago. The room went dead silent. What happened? Linda demanded. Premature labor, Amanda whispered. She told the paramedics she'd been having contractions all day but was afraid to go to the hospital because she couldn't afford it. She was trying to wait until someone from the Family Future Foundation could meet her there with the medical assistance money they'd promised. The weight of Patricia's crime suddenly became terrifyingly real. While we'd been exposing her lies at a dinner party, her victim had been suffering alone in a motel room, too scared and broke to seek medical help. The baby? I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. Amanda's voice was barely audible. Touch and go. The fluorescent lights of the hospital waiting room buzzed overhead as we sat in a horrible tableau of guilt and recrimination. David hadn't spoken since we'd arrived 30 minutes ago, just stared at his hands while I tried to process that a teenager was fighting for her life and her baby's life because of his mother's greed. Linda Chen emerged from the restricted access doors with grim expression. Emma's stable for now, but the baby was born at 32 weeks. He's in the NICU. He? David's voice cracked on the word. A son, Linda confirmed. 2 pounds, 4 ounces. The doctors say the next 48 hours are critical. I felt something break inside my chest. While Patricia had been spinning elaborate lies about fake surrogates and family legacies, there had been a real baby, a tiny, vulnerable human being, whose life hung in the balance. Can we see her? I asked. Emma? Linda shook her head. She's sedated right now, but when she wakes up, she's going to have questions. She keeps asking the nurses about the woman from the foundation who was supposed to help with the bills. What are we going to tell her? David asked hollowly. The truth, Linda said firmly. That she was the victim of fraud, and that there are resources available to help her and her baby through legitimate channels. But Amanda, who'd been on her phone near the vending machines, approached us with a stricken expression. There's something else. I just got off the phone with Jessica again. When Emma was brought in, she had a folder with her. Documents that Patricia had given her. What kind of documents? Linda asked sharply. Fake medical insurance cards. Fake charity authorization letters. And a pre-approval form for something called Family Transfer Services. The phrase hit me like ice water. Family transfer. Patricia wasn't planning to wait for Emma to voluntarily give up the baby after birth. What do you mean? David asked. Linda's face had gone pale with professional understanding. It means Mrs. Whitmore may have been planning to take the baby directly from the hospital using fraudulent documentation. Emma might never have had the chance to make a real decision about adoption. The scope of Patricia's planned crime was expanding by the hour. Not just fraud, not just exploitation, but potential kidnapping of a newborn infant from his mother. There's more, Amanda continued reluctantly. The papers included a fake birth certificate with your names on it. David and Sarah Morrison, listed as the biological parents. David shot to his feet so fast his chair toppled backward. She was going to steal a baby and put our names on legal documents? Without our knowledge? It gets worse, Linda said grimly. I just heard from my supervisor. Patricia Whitmore isn't the only one involved in this operation. The woman she called Carol? She's been under investigation for baby trafficking for 6 months. They think there are at least 12 other families who paid money for babies from desperate mothers. My hands started shaking. 12 other families like us? People who don't know their babies were stolen? No, Linda clarified. 12 other families who did know. Patricia appears to have been the only client who was planning to surprise the intended parents. The distinction made it somehow worse. Other people had knowingly participated in buying babies, while Patricia had been planning to make us unknowing accessories to kidnapping. David's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it with a frown. It's my dad. He says Margaret just collapsed at the house. They're bringing her to the hospital too. Guilt? I asked. Heart palpitations, he read. She keeps saying she killed a baby. But before anyone could respond, Linda's radio crackled to life. All units, we have a situation at county jail. The suspect Patricia Whitmore is claiming she has information about other pregnant women in immediate danger. Linda's face went grim. She's trying to bargain. And I realized that even from a jail cell, Patricia was still manipulating everyone around her, including a newborn fighting for his life 3 floors above us. The next morning, Linda Chen found us still in the hospital waiting room, exhausted and hollow-eyed. David had finally fallen asleep slumped against my shoulder, and I'd spent the dark hours staring at the ceiling tiles, trying to process how our marriage had imploded and rebuilt itself in the span of 12 hours. Emma's awake, Linda said softly. She wants to meet you. We followed her through the maze of corridors to a private room where a young woman with dark hair and exhausted eyes was sitting up in bed, staring out the window. She was smaller than I'd expected, looking far younger than 19, with the kind of bone-deep weariness that comes from months of surviving on nothing. Emma, Linda said gently, these are David and Sarah. Their names were on the fake documents Patricia gave you. Emma turned toward us, and I saw something I hadn't expected, relief rather than anger. You didn't know, she said quietly. It wasn't a question. No, David said, his voice rough from exhaustion and guilt. We had no idea. If we had known what she was planning, you would have stopped her, Emma finished. The nurses told me about last night. How your whole family turned her in. She was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Whitmore told me you were desperate for a baby but couldn't have one naturally. The irony of it hit me like a physical blow. Patricia had used our real pain to justify her crimes. We were struggling, I admitted. But we would never have chosen to hurt someone else to solve our problems. Emma nodded slowly. She showed me pictures of your house. Said the baby would have everything I could never give him, good schools, college funds, a stable family. Her voice cracked slightly. For a while, I thought maybe she was right. And now? I asked gently. A fierce light came into her eyes. Now I know my son doesn't need a mansion. He needs his mother. She paused, then looked directly at me. The doctors say he's going to make it. He's small, but he's a fighter. Relief flooded through me so intensely I had to sit down. Thank God. There's something else, Linda said, consulting her notes. Patricia's cooperation led to the arrest of the entire baby trafficking ring. 12 other families are being investigated, and 6 more pregnant women have been located and offered legitimate support services. Emma smiled for the first time since we'd entered the room. So something good came out of this nightmare. David stepped forward hesitantly. Emma, I know this is complicated, but if there's anything we can do to help, legitimately help, with medical bills or resources. Actually, Emma said, surprising us both, there is something. I'm studying early childhood education, and after everything that's happened, I want to work with other pregnant women in crisis situations. But I'll need to finish my degree. There are programs for that, Linda said immediately. Scholarships, childcare assistance, housing support, all completely legal and above board. As we talked about real solutions and genuine support, I felt something shift inside my chest. The desperate, clawing need for a baby that had consumed me for months was still there, but it had transformed into something healthier. We would find our own path to parenthood, through continued fertility treatments, through legitimate adoption, or through accepting that our family might look different than we'd planned. 6 months later, David and I visited Emma and baby Miguel in their small but cheerful apartment near campus. Patricia was serving 18 months in federal prison, and the trust fund had been permanently dissolved. Patricia's crimes had provided grounds for the family foundation to revoke access entirely. Any regrets? Emma asked as I held Miguel, now healthy and reaching for everything in sight. I looked at David, then back at this remarkable young woman who'd turned her trauma into purpose, now halfway through her degree and working part-time at a crisis pregnancy center. Only that we didn't expose Patricia sooner, I said honestly. Maybe then you wouldn't have suffered so much. Emma shook her head. I needed to learn I was stronger than I thought. And Miguel needed to know his mother wouldn't give up on him. As we left that evening, David took my hand. We were different people than we'd been at that dinner party, scarred but stronger, our marriage rebuilt on honesty rather than secrets. 3 months later, our fertility treatments finally worked. But by then, we'd already begun the adoption process too, knowing that family comes in many forms, and that love, not genetics or money, is what makes it real. Patricia had tried to engineer a grandchild to secure her inheritance. Instead, she'd taught us that the most precious things in life can't be bought, stolen, or manipulated into existence. They have to be earned through truth, patience, and genuine care for others. And sometimes, that's the most valuable legacy of all.